All food was rationed during the war, except for vegetables. Everybody was issued with a ration book, and we registered at a particular grocer, and you went to that grocer to get your groceries. They would cut out coupons, or they would mark the ration books so that you couldn't get more than your fair share. There was one period during the war when eggs were in very short supply, when the ration was 1 egg per person per month. What was more important to me as a kid was that candy was rationed. You could get 3/4 pound per person per month. At the beginning of the month, I'd run out and buy a lot because I always ran out long before the month. Canned food was very valuable. It was hoarded and only brought out on special occasions. A can of Spam was really worth its weight in gold. And salmon, wow, that was a delicacy that we didn't have very often. Meat was rationed. We got just a few ounces of meat per person per week, and we had to register at butchers also. My mother used a particular butcher called Barnett's, and I believe that place is still there. She would go early in the morning and line up outside, or queue up as they say in England, queue up outside the store and wait her turn. And sometimes by the time she got to the counter there was nothing left. The only way you could make sure that you got your rations was to bribe the butcher. And my mother used to complain bitterly about that. She didn't bribe anybody. We didn't have enough money for that. Most of the shops in Petticoat Lane were owned by Jewish people, and as a result they were closed on Saturdays. Sunday they were open from till about 2 until the market was over. I always enjoyed seeing the escape artists in Petticoat Lane Market. There were 4 or 5 of these people. One of them would take his shirt off, and he would be wrapped in chains and handcuffs and tied up, and sometimes even have a straitjacket on and a blindfold. And his job was to escape from these chains. But before he would do that, his accomplices would go around with a hat collecting money, and there'd be all kinds of chatter and patter about what he was going to do and how he could never get out of these chains and so forth and so on. And of course he always did. They wouldn't start their performance until they collected enough money. There was another market I used to go to sometimes after I'd been to Petticoat Lane, and that was called Club Row. Club Row was at the end of Brick Lane, which was maybe a 15-minute walk. Of course we always walked from Petticoat Lane Market. Club Row was basically a pet market. People would bring their cats and dogs, puppies and goldfish and canaries and every kind of 4-legged beast you can imagine. And I used to be fascinated by going to the market. I decided I wanted a pet mouse, but I didn't tell anybody. I knew my mother would never stand for having a mouse in the house. She hated mice. So I didn't tell anybody, but what I did, I got a cigar box and I cut some holes in it for ventilation. I went to the market one Sunday and bought this little mouse. I brought it home and I was fascinated with this thing. I made a little nest for it. I didn't have any straw or hay, so I got some string and I unwound the string so the mouse would have a nest. And I put it on my window ledge. That was on a Sunday. Monday I took it to school, showed all the kids. Everybody was excited, of course. Nobody ever brought a mouse to school. And in the afternoon, I came into the classroom and there was a girl there that I didn't recognize. And she was facing away from me, and I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, "Hey, look at this." Well, it wasn't a girl, it was a temporary teacher. And she was not amused by this. She said, "Get that out of here. We have enough of those running around here as it is without you bringing some." I think it was probably on a Wednesday. I came home from school and my mother was livid. She had found the mouse. I left it in the box on my window ledge and she heard it scratching. And she was absolutely furious with me. "You got to get rid of it," she said. So I said, "Please, look, I paid 9 pence for this thing. At least let me keep it till next Sunday and take it back. Maybe he'll give me my money back." She said, "Okay, but you certainly can't keep it in your bedroom. You got to keep it under the bathtub." And the bathtub was on 4 legs. And so I did. And the Sunday I took it back regretfully. And I went back to the man. I told him my mother wouldn't let me keep it. So he bought it back for me for 6 pence. So I lost 3 pence on the deal, about 5 cents total. We burned coal for heat, and so did everybody else. As a result, there was a great deal of air pollution. Buildings were grimy. In fact, some of these buildings had never been cleaned, and you couldn't tell what the original color was. Sometimes in the winter time, we'd get these terrible fogs. It's actually smog. They were called pea soupers because the fog was as thick as pea soup. And on occasion, you would see buses going very slowly down the street with the conductor of the bus walking in front of it with a flashlight showing the bus driver where the curb was. Since coal burning is not allowed anymore, the air in London is much cleaner, and as far as I know, they don't have pea soup fogs anymore. In the Petticoat Lane market during the week at that time, you would buy your fruit and vegetables and fish, and it was just around the corner, so it was very convenient. Most all of the merchants were Jewish, and most of the customers were Jewish. During the week, the market occupied 2 or 3 streets, but on Sunday, it spread far and wide. Petticoat Lane Market then became not just a fruit and vegetable and fish market, but you could buy anything you wanted, from clothing to jewelry to tools to crockery, almost everything you can think of. At that time, many of the stall holders were Jewish, but now they're Asians, they're Indians, Pakistanis, and so forth. I always enjoyed going to the market. The sights and the smells and the sounds of the stall holders hawking their wares, yelling out what they were selling, to me was exciting, and I went there almost every Sunday. It was in that market that I first started my sales career. I came home from school one day, and my mother said, "I'm going to throw out all this stuff. You're not playing with them anymore." She had gathered up most of the toy soldiers and toy trucks and comic books that I had. She said, "They're taking up space. You don't play with them. I'm going to get rid of them." I said, "Please don't do that. I'm going to see if I can sell them in the market." That Sunday, I put all of this stuff in a suitcase. I walked a couple of blocks to the market and walked around until I found a stall that was empty. Whoever had rented it for that day hadn't shown up. I put my wares on the stall, and lo and behold, I sold almost everything. I think in the 3 or 4 hours I was there, I made perhaps a whole $1. Doesn't sound much, but since I got maybe the equivalent of 25 cents a week as spending money, it was a big deal for me. And from then on, anytime I accumulated stuff that I didn't want, I'd take it down to the market, find an empty stall, and get rid of it. So that's how I started my sales career, which continued for all of my working life. Not in the market, but it was a good first experience for me. The market's called Petticoat Lane because in the 16th century, people started selling old clothes there, hence petticoats, and the name has stuck. The actual name of the streets are Middlesex Street, Goulston St, Wentworth Street, but collectively it's called Petticoat Lane. One of the things that you'll still see in Petticoat Lane Market are several stalls selling jellied eels. This was a delicacy in England, but as a child I never tried it because, number one, it was not kosher. Eels are not kosher. In order for fish to be kosher, it has to have scales. The second and main reason I never ate these things was that there was a man who lived near us who sold eels in the market, and I would stand there and watch him many times in fascinated horror. He had a little sort of a garage that he worked out of, and he'd have a fish box full of eels, and he'd pick up a live eel, decapitate it, cut it open, take out its guts. He'd chop up the eel into bite-sized pieces and toss them into a box. So certainly I could never eat those things after seeing that, as I did many times. When I was about 11 years old or so, my parents decided it was time I got a proper Jewish education, and they sent me to Hebrew school, or as it's called, cheder. I didn't like going to Hebrew school. First of all, I had to go to Hebrew school after my regular school, and I'd already had a day's worth of school, so I didn't particularly care to go again, but I had no choice, I had to go. The Hebrew school was located in an old synagogue called the Mezikadas. That building has an interesting history. That part of London had been settled in the early 1600s by French Huguenots, or Huguenots, I never quite know how to pronounce that. These were French Protestants who were persecuted in France, and they were given asylum in England. A lot of them were silk weavers, and they settled in that part of London. These built these tall houses and had workrooms where they spun and wove silk. The Huguenots built a chapel. That chapel later on became a synagogue that I went to Hebrew school. And later on, in the 70s or 80s, when almost all the Jews had left the area and people from Bangladesh moved in, it became a mosque.